Welcome to RFG Exchange. It is clear container technologies still have a lot of growing up to do. We spoke with experts from Canonical, Cisco, IBM and Red Hat to discuss why containers exist at the abstraction frontier and which orchestration mechanisms apply where. We'll talk about what does and does not work in container adoption, including why the lift and shift approach used by machine containers is currently better poised to gain traction than process containers. That's just some of the insight coming up right now on the rounds. Let's get to it.
Dangerous to describe something as one thing when you can't use it. You can't use it with all of the tools. You know,
well,
an image that's been built for a process container wants to be run by something like Mesosphere or Kubernetes or Docker Engine, right? And that has expectations about that thing, right? If that thing is going to behave dramatically differently, you're going to drop it onto your process container engine and it's going to blow up. So the truth is, we have these different classes of containers and they will evolve independently.
I disagree that it will blow up. Until recently, Docker didn't have an orchestration model, right? They just recently introduced Swarm with.
Now we're into it.
Well, they didn't have it, right? They introduced Swarm this year, like in June.
Which Swarm?
Which Swarm? The latest Swarm.
The Swarm that actually orchestrates something, right? Thing on Kubernetes, but you look at Kubernetes as something that's focusing on single process containers, but that's not accurate either, because Kubernetes is basically just systemd for a cluster. Right? What we're seeing is in a way you could look at it, a Tenable.
Systemd runs processes. You're exactly right, but you're sort of missing the point.
But we also have two different types of orchestration here. I mean, ultimately, because we're still talking about containers, and when we get back to the ephemeral notion, I mean, you can run single containers in kind of like a batch mode. You're running quick, very short, long, exactly, tasks, right? You're running that task, it does its task, and it's done. You may be running, from a microservices point of view, long-running services. Single process containers actually fit quite well. Orchestrated with Kubernetes, orchestrated with Docker Swarm, pick your poison, right? There is going to be one. They both can still use the same image format, but that is different from a container machine.
Well, yeah,
exactly.
The life cycle
both
of the management
them are
essentially
very
managing clusters of processes, each of which has an IP address. They're essentially taking the multi-process, multi-thread idea and spreading it across a cluster, right? They're bringing processes up from the machine to the cluster to a more abstract level.
Correct.
Whereas running a cluster of LXD machines is just like running a cluster of ESX, right? It's a set of VMs. You would never stick that behind Kubernetes. You might stick it behind OpenStack.
Absolutely, you would put it behind Kubernetes.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely, and they so Kubernetes actually doesn't talk to containers itself. It's scheduling unit is a higher level concept, right? It's a pod, which a pod. There are multiple projects in the community mapping pods to VMs. So Kubernetes actually will be able to schedule VMs, like traditional VMs on top of KVM. Because it's just, Kubernetes, well, just is kind of a dangerous word, but it's an orchestrator and cluster manager and an application service description language, so you can get to building blocks for higher level applications. What's underneath the fact that it uses Docker. It will use Rocket going forward, and it will use KVM VMs underneath. That has nothing to do with whether your container is a single process container, it's a stateful application, it's a multi-service container running systemd inside the container, or it's a pet, right, where you log into that container. Now, granted, you need some features that are not shipping in any production Kubernetes right now, like pet sets, stuff like that actually enables, if you do it today, your database, put an Oracle database or something like that, or maybe you put that in a container, run it with Kubernetes, get kicked around a bit more than the database would like. But that's going to change, right? Pet sets address that. So, and it's a fully converged model. I totally don't see the differentiation you draw there in the technology. In the use case, I agree, but not in the technology.
Look, abstraction is a very interesting exercise, and when you're pushing the frontiers, people tend to make the mistake of thinking that some new abstraction model is just going to solve all the problems and deal with all of the issues, and that never happens. A classic example of that, people who thought they could just lift and shift their VMs into the public cloud found that that just offered a different set of abstractions. It sounds similar, VM there, VM here, but just think about when that VM boots in the cloud, we have entirely new mechanisms to inject information to it as to what it's supposed to do. And if you inject a VM into a public cloud that is dumb about those mechanisms, it just doesn't work. To really get the most out of something like Kubernetes or Mesosphere or Docker Engine, Docker Swarm, you're going to build process containers that have expectations that they're running in that environment, and they'll be beautiful and great. Alternatively, if you just try and lift and shift a VM and dump it in there, it's like lifting and shifting a VM and sending it to a public cloud. You're going to look like an idiot. So try it.
So before you leap back in, Carlos has been sitting in the middle, so I'll let him arbitrate here for a moment.
How's those bruises?
I'm finding this fascinating because both sides have kind of source of the truth, and in the end of the day, the majority of the business guys don't care about this. They're caring about whatever you pick underneath. Can I make my operation works? So we are implementing Kubernetes to run some VNFs that are formed to be run on OpenStack.
Right.
There are immutable containers, some of those are just ephemeral. At the same time, you're running and qualifying with swarms and Kubernetes and Mesosphere and everything that is stateless in that sense. And as another piece of the triangle, we are trying to figure out the security for containers and how you handle state on a process container or whatever you're going to call now that is stateless by definition. So my whole point is, when it boils down to the real day two operation, my business is running on that particular app and I'm running now on that container, whatever kind you guys agreed upon, that ends up being, okay, can I make sure that it's reliable, it's secure, and it's have high availability? And that's where we are facing the challenges the most from our customers. That technical argumentation is going to go on and on and on, and I wish we had Docker on that table. It's going to be even better discussion. It's going to be so much fun. But in the end of the day, is the customers are coming to us and other vendors, and we have Stephen here to make even further comments, is in the end of the day, whatever you select, how can I make that transition to more efficient, to more lightning, to more agile? And if containers is the answer, where I would use them today, regardless of the technology underneath, because they're evolving. In 2 years, there's going to be a new shiny object for us
All of these containers are good. Like smart operators are going to use all of these containers.
Oh, yeah.
Mallets and hammers are both good. You want them both in the tool shed. You don't use them for the same thing, right? So Kubernetes, Mesosphere, all of those things, really good. Machine containers, really useful.
The machine container concept is interesting for the just approach of lifecycle management. A lot of people
just
are
simple lift and shift.
Well, beyond that, right, you have to look at it as redefining how we look at the operating system. Right? Traditionally, if you look at, it's inherited from Unix, Linux. The default is a single machine, and all your services are to run processes on a single machine. And it's a monolithic user space. Everything is compatible with everything. Right? And when you try to mix and match things, you run into challenges because you get into dependency tree issues and you start relocating stuff, and it gets really complicated, right? And you spend all your time in an area where you don't really have any business differentiation, right? It doesn't help you with your application to deal with dependency conflict or the conflict. This
it costs more, actually.
It costs more, right? It hurts you that this stack is only available from Debian, this other stack is only available from Red Hat. It doesn't help you, right? No. What containers do, and I add Kubernetes, but it's as a representative of the class of orchestrators. And actually Fleet would have been the first one I put in there. So containers partition your system into separate namespaces so you can look at individual software stacks independent of other software stacks. And you get different ways, different fancy ways of using tar to make that really nice.
You're going to the deep piece, but when you talk about user space and namespace, we work together with IBM on some stuff that made user space, namespace for the security issue. It boils back on my discussion. People say, I'm adopting this, how I can make sure that I have isolation and all that environment, whatever container you choose.
While IT struggles to figure out how to use these new tools, business executives and users don't care about technical minutia. It is results they are looking for. Solutions that provide both high availability and security, regardless of the container type or where it's physically or logically located. Until business requirements can be understood and satisfied, the migration to containers will be constrained. IT must solve these governance, process, and technology challenges, and soon, or container projects could end up unfunded until the technology has sufficiently matured. Stay tuned for actionable insight with top vendor and end user practitioner executives you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and on our website at rfgex.com to be amongst the first to know.